They talking about moving out into.
Yeah.
I'd like to call to order this June 25th meeting of the Ascension Parish Finance Committee. There are several folks who are not here, so we'll run through those real quickly. Councilman Turner is not here. Councilman Satterley is not here. And Councilman Cagnolotti is not here. I'm not aware that any one of the three will be arriving during the meeting, but if they should, we'll certainly let the secretary know. At this time, if there are no chairs additions, we were fortunate that the DA did not have to come and ask for us to sustain his budget, so we're grateful there are no chairs additions. And the public comment period will be immediately following each item on the agenda. So if you have, we're going to do that in just a second. If I got out of line, so I'll get to that. If you have something you want to say, come please and fill out your red or green card and pass it across the desk with the secretary. Now, I think I finally spotted my Reverend. If Reverend Dawson will please come forward and lead us in the prayer, we will follow that with the pledge. Thank you.
Let us pray. Father, we thank you for the blessings you continue to give us and all the wisdom that you lend us, oh God, to do the people's business. We pray for Ascension Parish that you will continue to bless this parish. And during the time when we enter into this season of storms and hurricanes, we pray for your protection upon this area. And even bless those, oh God, and continue to help those who are still recovering from the 2016 flood. We also pray for the neighboring areas in Houston, oh God, who suffered so great tragedy. We pray that you bless them and help them as well. As we go forth with the people's business tonight, we pray for your wisdom and guidance so that we do it well. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. The first item, number 5, under general business, is the 4th amendment to the leased employee agreement between Our Lady of the Lake Ascension, doing business as St. Elizabeth Physicians, and the Coroner's Office for the Parish of Ascension, and the Parish of Ascension to increase the pay rate for the leased employee to $2,014.90 from the previous year amount of $1,927.23. Mr. Parrington. Oh.
Ain't much difference.
I don't think that's a big deal. It's just a little increase.
Make that motion, Madam Chair.
Have a motion by Councilman Todd Lambert.
Second.
Second by Councilman Dempsey Lambert. Any questions? Any objections? Hearing none, that motion passes. Item number 6, renewal of an agreement between Guidry Associates, LLC and the Ascension Parish Government for strategic consulting and advocacy services to include, but not limited to, providing intergovernmental strategic consulting and advocacy services relating to federal, state programs, and policies of interest to the Parish of Ascension, not to exceed $90,000. Mr. Manasseh.
Mr. Guidry is stuck in traffic in New Orleans tonight, and I will have him at the regular meeting to answer any questions. But right now, the big thing he's working on is that USDA grant. He had set up a meeting, and the chairman was there, and a couple, Oliver, and I don't remember who else was there, but we had a very good meeting with him, and Owen and White did our application, and Chris is working with him because we thought we would fall into that bracket of 75-25 match. Well, they pulled some numbers ahead and said we were in that 45% area. So we're challenging that, and so that's what Chris is working on to move us back towards that 75. 75 is the most they'll give you, but you know when you go ahead and you get millions and they give you 75% of it, that's pretty good. So that's what we're looking at doing for the water system in Donaldsonville right now. He's working on that. Also, the big thing in Washington is the transportation plan, that the president didn't actually put out any rules or anything on how to get any of that money yet, and they're supposed to do it by August. So Chris is on top of that. And then besides, he was at the legislature every week, and he would call and talk about different issues and that was pertaining to Ascension Parish. But I will have him at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matasha. Any questions? Mr. Kluwat?
Yeah, Kenny, I'd like for, you said you can have Chris at the next
Right.
meeting, but two things that I'd like to check on. One definitely is where we stand on the state level on our budget, and, you know, some updates on some of the things that are hanging out there.
Sure.
On the Restore Act, Restore Louisiana. I'd also like for them to get an update from Garrett Graves and the gang up in D.C. on where we stand on this duplication of benefits under the FEMA program and the Restore. That basically they're holding SBA loans as duplication of benefits, and it's damn sure not a benefit if you got to pay it back with interest, okay? So, and I think everybody's very clear on that. We've been fighting that for over a year now.
Right, right.
And I would like to see where we stand on some of that stuff going along with some of the things that impact citizens of Ascension
Sure.
Parish directly right now.
I agree with you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson?
Oh, no, never mind.
Mr. Joseph?
Well, Mr. Chris Guidry, I mean, so far you've been doing a good job. The only thing is I would like to know, can we get something to compare what we paying, what we getting for our money with other parishes? I mean, sorry, just like to know what we getting in return for this money. I know last year it was pretty lower than what it is this year, but comparing his rates for us to get a lobbyist, you know, for other parishes, I think we're getting a pretty good deal. But I'd like to know those numbers.
Oh, no, we could check that out. But let me just say, we've been paying this range for a bunch of years. We had different lobbyists, even going back to the military guy. And then we had the newspaper man. Well, you know, now we got a real certified lobbyist. But anyway.
And that's what I
agree.
like to
I understand
compare.
what you're saying. Sure, we'll get that report to y'all, you know.
Yes.
I understand that.
Thank you, Mr. Joseph.
And it was
Any
done
other-
in an RFP, yeah. And this is the last year in a 3-year contract under that RFP we did.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
I'll move to move it forward to the full
Second.
council.
I have a motion by Mr. Dawson, a second by Mr. Joseph. Any other questions? Any objections? Hearing none, that motion passes. Item number 7, renewal of a cooperative endeavor agreement between the Board of Supervisors of Louisiana State University and A&M College, represented by the LSU Agricultural Center, and the Ascension Parish government to ensure Louisiana Cooperative Extension Service continues to provide 4-H youth development programs not to exceed $50,000. Mr. Matasha.
Well, this is our annual agreement with the Extension Service that helps pay to have that person there. And, you know, we give them housing, and it's Mr. Nunez right now. Is that correct, Dempsey? Is Nunez the?
He moved on.
He-
They put someone else.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I will research that and give you all the information
that
on it,
motion.
but
I'll second the
I have a
motion. I got
motion by
questions.
Mr. Benny Johnson, a second by Mr. Randy Kluwat, and a question by Mr. Kluwat.
Yeah, well, Dwayne Nunez did a great job, and he's moved on. And they got somebody in his place, and I was notified of that a month or so ago, and me and Dempsey, and I can't remember, I apologize not remembering.
so he's actually going right now? Okay.
And, but I'm very much in support of the 4-H program and the LSU Cooperative Extension Service. And once more, we'll have that person back at the meeting, hopefully, and if we want to get an update from them. And
I will
There's-
notify him to be at the July meeting over here.
their services go far further than 4-H, okay? That if anybody has any issues with a tree, if your tomato plants don't grow in the backyard, give them a soil sample, they'll straighten you out, whatever it takes.
Well, and you know, in my little dealings with them, I had them at the glass house, and they came out and they gave me the chemical to put in the pond, you know, around the pond. They
Yeah.
did a good job on that.
Yep.
Now, let me just say this, you know, people, we deal with LSU basically with the 4-H, except for this guy here. Other than that, we don't do much with the 4-H. Now, this past season, it was very cold, and we got blamed for not putting them in the 4-H building with the pigs, but that was asked to us by LSU. And I just went along with what LSU said. Now, so after the cold weather, I thought that LSU was working with the locals, but they were not. So I got with Kyle today, and we ordered some matting that will go around for protection for the cold, and, you know, we can use salamanders and different things. And we're going to really help them on the outside, but I got to remind people the pigs was not born in the house, and they're not raised in the house. So, you know, we're going to help them, but that 4-H building, when it was we spent $4 million in that building.
Yeah.
It was just for showing purposes of the state show, and that was the agreement that LSU wanted, and that's what we did.
And,
Mr. Kluwer.
yeah, and Mr. Dempsey Lambert can back me on this. What we did was in 2016, that discussion took place, and that the addition, and Chairman Dawson is aware that we added on that cover on the outside of the 4-H building, and for
Correct.
that purpose, and Mr. Nunes, who was running that program, and that everybody with that program was very much in contention with that and satisfied with that. We hit some cold weather. Appreciate the fact that we're going to put a shield on them next year. And I've shown in the freezing cold, and it ain't that good. Okay, so
No, I understand.
But,
I just didn't
short of
realize
them
it was
being
happening.
short of them being inside the building, and there's some negatives with that. So we're going to work with the 4-H program. But I think you got it worked out, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we had a motion and a second. Any further questions? Any objections? Hearing none, that motion passes. Now, number 8, the 2017 audit presentation. We welcome this afternoon, of course, Mr. Jacob Wagasback and Tommy Lejeune from Falk & Winkler. Thank you so much for
Thank
being
you,
with us.
guys. Appreciate seeing you all. What we've got in front of you tonight is a pretty large amount of information. Sort of consists of a number of documents. One, you're going to see a very large booklet, which is your 2017 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, which is your annual audit. Included in there are about 4 documents, smaller in nature than the 300 pages that are in the big booklet. But basically, we've got for you some additional letters that we've issued as part of this process, and then we've also have on top basically a summarization that captures a number of information, so we don't have to go through the entire all the documents that are set out in front of you. But we basically summarize the financial results and then the results and recommendations relative to the audit. So if you start with this one packet, and want to make sure you each have this, it's basically a colored document with the presentation of 2017 operating results. If you go to page 2, just from a general standpoint, we have basically reviewed the audit results. We started the audit in March of 2018. In May, when we concluded all of our procedures, we sort of met with your finance team and sort of went over the results in terms of how that process concluded. We followed up with some meetings with your audit committee and parish administration in the early part of May. And so basically have gone through a lot of this information already. So for some of the individuals that are on that committee, this will be somewhat redundant. The other thing I wanted to point out that's new this year is what's called statewide agreed upon procedures. These are mandatory processes that the legislative auditor has required every municipality in the state to walk through. So you're going through this process just like everyone else. And so basically what it required was, one, looking at your policies, the existence of policies, and certain elements of policies that the legislative auditor required are considered best practices, and then just certain mandatory audit procedures. So we went through a lot of data. They just basically took out some judgment associated with certain aspects of audits. So we went through that information for the first time. Included in this packet is going to be basically your 2017 financial results and then the previous 4 years of financial results as a comparison. Jacob's going to walk you through that a little later. And then included in the booklet, and I'm going to make reference to some pages for your reading later, we've got a number of recommendations, both procedural and operational. And then there's also two separate reports that are stapled within the document that I'll make reference to that include some additional recommendations. But if you move over to page 3, basically here, I just want to make reference to a couple of things. We've got page numbers associated with the document, so you can go quickly to it. But these are some critical elements of the report beyond just pure finance. First bullet point under your auditor's report is we have a 3-page opinion. We go through and ascertain your compliance with what are called governmental generally accepted accounting procedures and financial reporting practices. We basically provide an opinion relative to your compliance with what's required of all governments across the country in terms of national accounting procedures. So we went through that, and basically we provided an unmodified report, which is referred to commonly as a clean opinion. So that's basically dealing with purely your accounting or your financial reporting practices, the numbers that are present in your document, present in the document. The second report, which is at the back half, the latter part of the financial, the bound document, is a report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance. Basically, this relates to us looking at your accounting practices and accounting procedures and related internal controls. The second part of that report is dealing with general compliance, and usually what's entailed in that are certain state laws and regulations, like your budget law, the state cash management law, and then we'll also look at certain grant contracts on a selective basis, and that's in terms of your compliance with contractual obligations. And the third report that's critical is you receive a lot of federal money, and so there's special auditing requirements associated with federal grants, and so there's a special auditor's report related to that, and then we basically test those programs that are considered major, so it's high dollar level programs, and so those federal agencies have specific auditing requirements that we have to follow. Some of it's present in your contracts, some of it's implied in terms of the legislation that you have to follow. So we develop a number of procedures associated with that. So those are back there. Basically we provide an opinion on your federal grant programs, and those were clean as well. Now if you come down and look at the next items, we did have some reportable recommendations, and those are listed for you on pages 243 to 247. I've highlighted 3 that I just wanted to touch on tonight, which are somewhat new this year. The first one dealing with daily deposits. As part of this state agreed upon procedures engagement, we're required to look at just your practice associated with depositing of receipts, cash, checks, things of that nature. But just the daily incoming resources and your process associated with getting those into the bank. What's required under state law is that's done on a daily basis, regardless of amount. And so, although we ended up testing about $24 million in receipts, there was about $25,000 that we found that didn't make it on the same day. So it might have lagged a couple of days, but unfortunately, under the state's cash management law, it's daily. It's explicit in the law that you do it daily. Now, these may have been in 2, 3, maybe 4 days, so it wasn't as if they never made it to the bank. But it did take some time, and when you look at the law, it's pretty clear. It doesn't define an amount. It just simply says all and daily. So that was a technical compliance matter that we reported.
Excuse me, Tommy. Which department was that?
That's a good point. One of the things I would tell you that these were kind of external to where you have your normal collection points. So the large volume of receipts that you normally receive at different, at your major finance areas, those we didn't have any issues with. It was some of your more isolated collection points. So I don't recall. Yeah, recreation, there might have been a few that don't have the normal practice of collecting money.
Could have been a recreation or utilities types.
Correct. And then some of them, like health unit will collect some money. And what's impractical with the law is that in certain cases, they may collect a dollar user fee from people. So they might have a deposit that's $20, but the law doesn't exempt amounts. And so those, as impractical it is, may it's more practical to sit on it and deposit it when it becomes a larger number. But unfortunately, the law is the law. So in this case, it was a few different places, and we'll get that for you, Mr. President, but it wasn't anything that I would consider to be what your normal large volume collection points. The other one, number 5, this was sort of isolated. Basically, we had a previous contractor that did some grass cutting for you, and so it was a vendor who later became an employee. And so there was a lag between their contract with the parish to do some private work and their being an employee, which is a prohibition under governmental ethics. So it was very minor in nature, and it's since been corrected. But basically, our point here was a procedure for as you onboard employees is some sort of ascertaining whether or not they're doing anything for you on a vendor basis. So but it was very minor. And then the last one I wanted to point to deals with your sewer ordinance. Basically, you're taking control. Basically, you had an ordinance that was enacted to take over small community sewer systems, and with the idea that you would assume operations as well as financial management. And what you need here is there's been a lag in terms of when some of those systems are at a point where the ordinance requires your takeover and when you're actually doing it. So the exchange we had with the administration was getting a process in place so those things turn over to the parish more quickly than they have been. So it's really more about having a process on the front end to identify when systems are likely going to be eligible to come into the parish system and acting upon it more timely, if that makes sense. The last thing I want to talk about before I turn it over to Jacob is at the bottom we have a management letter in your packet, and these are operational recommendations. So these are more, good food for thought. They are basically non-deficiencies or non-deficient issues in one sense, but things to just consider that could enhance your current practices. And I'm just going to touch on the 5th one, which is new in your budget as well as the parish charter. You have certain required elements that are mandated as part of your budget document, which you've historically maintained. But it also requires a day that when it comes to the parish by the 75th deadline, that it encompass all those elements. And there's just been, last year there was a couple elements that came in later past the 75th deadline. So it's sort of minor. You did get it. I think it came in around day 60. So it was within a pretty close proximity part of time. But on the other hand, the charter's pretty clear that it mandates certain elements, and it must be presented to the council by the 75th day, or 75th day before the end of the fiscal year. And so, if you read the charter, those elements are kind of critical to the budget process. So, in terms of you being able to make a decision, so I think those things, and that's sort of what the point we make here in this particular recommendation. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jacob to sort of walk through some of your numerical comparisons for the last 5 years, and then we'll open it up to some questions.
Good evening. I'm going to start on page 4. On page 4, you're presented here with 5 years' worth of the revenue trends for the governmental funds only. What you're going to see is from 2013 to 2016, we averaged about 96.7 million in revenues. That jumped up to about 100.7 million in 2016, and then we're at 110 million for 2017's audit. It's about a 10% increase there. Most of that increase was in the categories of grants, intergovernmental revenues, property taxes, and sales taxes jumped up about 2.4 million, which I will get into in just a second. The property taxes, the increase was about 2.8 million, but the big reasoning for that, your actual tax rolls did not go up that much. There were some accounting procedures when we had to recognize some revenue. Is the reason that the financial statements actually increased that much. But looking at sales tax, I'll flip over to slide 5. Here you're going to see sales tax, the increase in sales tax from 2016 to 2017. In that number, if you recall, there was about $4.8 million that was escrowed for some tax rebates for a project that had been going on. So for the year 2017, on the books, we have $57.5 million in sales tax revenues. If you back that number at $4.8 million out that was escrowed, we're actually at about $52.7 million in sales tax collections. Ends up at about a $2.5 million decrease for 2017 over 2016, which equates to about 45%. Over the previous 4 years, you averaged about 52.8 million. So you're right in line with where you were on average the last 4 years.
Not 45%.
No, 4.5%.
Okay, that's what I
4.5%.
I was gonna
I'm
correct.
sorry. I'm sorry if that came out. Yeah, no, it's 4.5% decrease. But as I said, on paper, it looks a little bit higher. Just, we did recognize that $4.8 million during 2017 fiscal year. Moving on to slide 6. Here we have the expenditures of the governmental fund types. One of the things here that really stands out to us is in 2017, the operation of the blue section appears to have spiked, although that's misleading to a sense. In 2017, you closed out the fleet management fund and discontinued its operations. All of those expenses, which equated to about $2.3 million in 2016, were spread across all of these governmental funds, so they are not included in 2013 to 2016. Overall, your operational expenditures did increase by about $3.9 million, but the vast majority of that is just the presentation on how we reported things in 2016 and before to how we did it in 2017 with that fleet management services. The fleet management is in 2017's number in this presentation. But you see here in the green a significant spike in capital outlay expenditures. And the other thing with overall expenses, we did carve out the hard cost of the disaster-related expenses. The yellow is the non-personnel, non-equipment reimbursement expenses that we claimed for the flood. Those were, I believe, about $6 million and about $500,000. I'm sorry, $6 million and $1.1 million for 2016 and 2017, respectively. But overall, really, as the government has grown, the operational expenses have increased slightly year over year, but pretty flat and at a really slow rate over the 5-year trend.
Yeah, the other thing I'd point out is that your debt service is not a large component of your expenditures, so it's not an overwhelming number from my point of view.
Moving on to slide 7, cash and investment of the primary governments, which encompasses all operations under the roof of your administration. End of the year at about $252 million in cash and investments. That is a large jump from the $192 million we had last year. But you have to consider of that $60 million increase, there was about $50 million in bond money that we took in, some for the courthouse, some for the Move Ascension Fund. All of that is still sitting on the books. We really haven't dipped into those bond funds for those planned capital projects as of December. But also looking just at the breakdown, you see the different colors. Each of those colors is representative of how you can use some money, which we'll get into a little later in a couple of more slides. But basically, really what the council and the administration has control over is that blue section, which is the smallest section after the debt service. That blue section is about $34 million of discretionary money, which is really tied up in your general fund and your sales tax 1 fund. Moving up to the green section, it's about $96 million. All of these funds are restricted based upon an ad valorem assessment or something of that nature. They have to be used for specific operations, which we'll get into that detail a little later. And then up into the red section, the capital outlay restrictions, $119 million sitting on the books at December 31. And then you see just a sliver of orange in there. That's your debt service. That's cash that's required to be held based upon your bond agreements with the bondholders.
Sinking funds, reserve funds, things of that nature.
But moving on to slide 8, this is the fund balances of the primary governments. You see that it trends relatively in comparison with how your cash and investments. It's a good indicator where cash and investment balances are. the fund balances of each of these operations. Again, up to $258 million in fund balance versus $192 million last year. And the breakdown is relatively the same. Pretty small portion on the blue section, which is unrestricted. Then the red and green, with green being the capital outlay, because the increase on the bond issuances. Looking at the next slide, it's really reflective of the previous slide with the graphs, just in a numerical format. Really, you have the four classifications: discretionary money, which can be used by you, as I stated. Committed money. Committed money is funds that, based upon your budget, you have put into certain operations, mainly the jail and recreation. Those funds can be moved in and out based upon your budget ordinance or the budget that you adopt. So they can be returned into that discretionary pot of money if that policy is adopted by the council. And then again, you have restricted operating funds. Here you see the breakdown. Really the three main ones are drainage, fire protection, and health and mental health. And then you also have your enterprise funds here. Drainage, your drainage operations, which is the drainage maintenance fund, your special revenue fund, began the year at $44.7 million in fund balance, had an increase of about $6.4 million in fund balance to end this year at $51 million. And then the fire protection, that's all fire districts combined, Fire District 1, 2, and 3, started the year out just over $23 million. They did expend about $2.8 million in those three operations to end the year at about $20.3 million. And then your mental and health units, $9.5 million to start the year, about a $1.2 million increase to end the year at about $10.7 million in fund balance. Moving on down to the last classification of fund balance, the capital outlay and debt service restricted amounts. Again, here your drainage capital outlay fund started the year at about $27.8 million. We did expend about $8.6 on top of what we took in the year at about $19 million. A lot of that money is still money that's hanging out there from the 2007 bond issuance. It was quite large. I think it was $65 million we took out back then.
Yeah,
So
65.
that's where that a lot of that money is still sitting at. And then here, your road construction fund, $22.5 million, with an increase of about $31 million, mainly from transfers and from the Move Ascension Fund bond issuance to end at about $53.7 million in road. Of that Move Ascension, I believe it was $25 million. That's causing the $31 million increase. And then the other is where we did put the courthouse bond issuance. That increase of $29 million, 25 of that is the courthouse funds. But here again, you ended the year at about $258 million in fund balance across all your operations. If you look at the overall financial picture, lots of cash and investments on hand with minimal long-term debt as a ratio. So parish is really in good spot from a financial perspective.
Yeah, and I just add, just looking at that breakdown, $258 million is a lot of money, but in the world, I think that you reside in, the cost of some of these major infrastructure projects always going to far outweigh the resources you've got available, fortunately. It's not that easy. I mean, I look at roads and there's $54 million. I just can't fathom what it would take to really change the dynamic of the road system. It's certainly more than $54 million is what I would expect. And certainly you've been able to accumulate a lot of money in the drainage area. That's a very, resources associated with the taxes you get there. It generate quite a bit of available dollars. But that's really where you got the majority of your money saved, roads and drainage, primary needs.
Okay. At this point, I'm sure that everybody needs to ask a few questions, so I will start. I'll just start on one end and work our way down. Mr. Joseph.
No question.
Mr. Dawson.
We'll have a few. Well, I'm kind of, the roads, while I'm looking at that, you know, Aaron, yeah, Aaron's here.
I'm here.
I could have missed him. But we have 25 million from the bond, but we also committed 10 million from this reserve to move Ascension. So when I look at that, when you had that slide up there showing that we have, can't see it now, but it's 20-something million plus another 30-something million in. Should we show that in reserve? But that's committed. 10 million of that 22 million is committed to move Ascension. 25 million of the 30 million is committed to move Ascension. So, you know, I think what we tried to do when we set that up is to commit what was reasonably available to that program and start trying to build and improve the roads. So.
Yeah, what
That
you're
was
saying-
just a comment.
Right, well, I guess what I'm understanding, what you're saying is that you've got that, we're showing that 54 million.
Yeah.
A lot of it's encumbered, you know, for
Yeah,
different
like
projects.
35 million of it is encumbered, and so we didn't feel comfortable really taking much more than the 10 million out of that projected reserve because of, you know, to have a reserve in case we had an issue with a major roadway system here.
Get that.
Okay. I'd also like to, I've got papers everywhere, but, you know, in our budget message, we talk about, you know, having a reserve fund equal to at least, a reserve in the general fund equal to at least 6 months of operating expenses in the general fund. Now, in all these numbers, that general fund gets fuzzy. You know, so I see, you know, if you call it reported general fund on one of these is $40 million, is what the reserve is in that 40,290,000 something and something. That's projected at the end of 2018. If we just talk about general fund, then there's general fund and sales and use tax district number 1. So really, you know, my question is, what is the fund that when we write that in the budget message, you know, what is the fund that we should be looking at, and where should we measure this? What expenses should we measure that against? And, you know, more important, I guess, are we at least 50% of that, which is what, you know, what we said our goal was. I don't know, am I confusing on that?
Yeah, let me just have a few comments, and then I could defer some of it to staff. You know, in terms of the intent of the ordinance, you know, historically, the parish is somewhat operated that what's in the general fund and what's in your sales and use tax district number 1 fund was anonymous in one sense. Sales and use tax district 1 fund was the one place that was the parish's savings account.
Right.
And so I've always kind of viewed them, even though that they are legally separate, I've viewed them operationally as that they work kind of together. So I don't look at them that viewpoint. But on the other hand, I'm not going to speak for repairs or your budget in terms of what the intent was. So that's my point of view. I would say certainly with you know, those two collectively at the end of the year was about $36 million. And if I looked at your total budgeted expenditures, you've got $17 million budgeted. So certainly well in excess of that minimum.
Okay. So I guess is maybe Ms. LeBlanc, is that, do you concur with that those where we make that measurement is on which funds?
We try to do it on all the funds, special revenues too.
I think we have something specific that we say our goal is to have 6 months
6 months,
expenditures
yeah.
in the general fund and to have that in the general fund reserve. Is that?
Right, correct.
So I guess what I'm asking is that which one of these funds is the general fund that we're talking about? Because in this report, for example, there's general fund and sales and use tax number 1, that's combined. And then at the bottom line of that is the reported general fund.
One quick comment I'll offer. If you look at 18's budgeted expenditures, you've got, and I'm just going to use round numbers, right at 17 million in budgeted expenditures, and your general fund is currently, at the end of the year, holding about 15.8. So even if you did measure it on its own, both funds collectively and
So
separately.
we're at
meet
about
the
10 months
requirement, regardless
expenditure.
of how we measure it.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. Did you have something else to add to that, Gwen? No. All right. I think the other point, just wanted to make sure that I'm correct, reading this correctly. So if I'm looking at page 8 and you have the graph here for 2017, and we show fund balance, primary government, and we show almost $260 million. But if I look at that blue portion, which is, from my understanding, that's the only portion that is not dedicated in some way or restricted in some way. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So out of this $260 million, we have, interpret that at about 35 million or so,
34 million.
which is this,
On the,
Those
Uh,
two funds.
yes,
on the next
those
page.
two funds.
Yeah.
So,
Those two funds.
you know, I didn't want to have this impression that we have $280 million sitting over $260 million sitting there in the bank that we could go spend on roads. I wish we did,
Right,
but
right.
we don't.
And that's sort of the purpose of page 9, is to sort of give you that exact, at least monetize that exact comment, Mr.
Yeah,
Dawson.
yeah.
It's just, you look at drainage, there's 258 million in fund balance, but drainage is roughly about 70 million of that. And then you don't have the power to go out and change how you can expend that money.
Correct.
That you basically collect the majority of those resources from a voter tax that dedicated it to drainage. That's where you use it. No
Well,
other way.
additionally, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this includes like the money that the fire department collects,
Right.
and that are run by these, independent boards, and mental health collects, and, there's these other entities that have their own reserves, but they are using dedicated funds, and,
Right.
we can't go in there and grab out of it.
That's correct. I mean, they're operated independently, and then their tax is similar to what I expressed, the drainage tax. It's a fire protection tax. You don't have the authority as a governing board to take fire protection money and spend it on roads. You just don't have that legal authority.
Yeah, James wouldn't like that, I don't think. So I've got another, this may be just more like an observation, but, so if I look at the top 10 sales taxpayers in Ascension Parish, if I look at that list, 60% of them are petrochem. And I would suspect, and just my rough numbers say that those 6 out of 10 contribute 25% of the total revenue that we receive off of this sales and use tax district number 1. My numbers are about 6.2 million and a total of about 25 million. And, I think historically, we've seen these reports, and about 50% of our sales tax comes from petrochem, but now we can drill down a little closer at this, and we can see these 6 major industries, which include some of them that here at this council, work for, that, they're the top contributors in our parish, and that was just an observation.
Right.
Thank you.
It's a big deal to your tax base.
Yes.
Any other
Thank you.
questions, Mr. Dawson?
No, thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Lambert,
Thank you,
Dempsey
Chair.
Lambert.
And Tom, I guess what I want to zoom in on here is the drainage. With all the capital projects that we got going, and I don't know if we'll meet back before the November election, but this renewal, without this renewal, we, just with the Laurel Ridge levy, that's 22 million. There's several other projects that are out there that's gonna, this number is just, it's not gonna be there.
It's going to get eroded.
Exactly. I know you deal with other parishes, Labor costs, machinery, other things that is needed to operate this. What is your suggestion, to keep this going?
Well, I think you're gonna constantly have pressure, from an operating expense point of view. That we all know that in 5 years, what it costs to do business today is not gonna be the same. I've seen that in my tenure with you and as well as other governments where I prepare budgets. So it is a lot of pressure. Fortunately, the parish has experienced a lot of growth from a tax point of view, in terms of collections. So you've been able to sort of sustain spending where you need to. So I think that, to answer your question is that I think there's gonna constantly be some pressure that you're gonna have to continue to invest. That if you're gonna spend money to invest in infrastructure, it's equally important to spend money to preserve it. And that takes people and equipment and effort. So I think that the more you do, the more roads that the parish spend, it's gonna be important to preserve it. You're not doing the same thing 10 years later. And then with the heavier traffic use, if you take roads, for example, certainly utilization is gonna be high and wear and tear is gonna be on it with that. Certainly maintaining it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, just with the Marvinboro pump station, each bay, just at a year, we're gonna spend at least $1.5 million on repairs, or just more or less keeping up to date with what we have. So just to let everyone know, it's cost a lot of money to keep the drainage up in this parish, and it shows good here, but the project we have out is gonna dwindle down fast. Thank you.
Yeah, just want to add to your point, looking at just the capital projects funds, if you follow just what's in your current 2018 budget, you're spending right at a third of that, right at $30 million coming out of that, and that's just what's budgeted. Right. Anything else you do in addition to what's in the 2018 plan, you clearly, at least from a budgetary point of view, eroding that down. So using the money, basically, is what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Todd Lambert.
Yeah, just to go off of what Dempsey says, that, our sales tax in the drainage is designed for the construction of the pumping stations, and we've done a great job and added the 7th pump. But this millage tax that is coming up for renewal is our maintenance budget. And our maintenance budget pretty much is handling DPW and cleaning of the lateral ditches. That's very important to get drainage to the major canals. So this millage is very important to the parish.
Right.
It was put there a long time ago, and it's been used heavily. I know all you guys up here, probably most of the time when you get a phone call, it's a drainage issue.
Yep.
It's a drainage issue. It's a ditch that's plugged up. It's covers that's smashed. And so it's definitely a very important tax that we need to stress to the public that it's very much needed. Especially after the flood of the big flood of 2016.
Right.
We got to keep them canals clean and them lateral ditches.
Your maintenance in the drainage system is totally different than the maintenance in a road system.
And it's a constant battle. It's
You're
not.
fighting-
It's
you're
a
fighting
constant.
nature.
Yeah. Drainage is a constant. Repairs. You don't just fix it and it's done. You keep working it.
If you think about it, you got one road system, but you've got 2 ditches on each side.
That's
so
correct.
You got twice as many.
That's correct.
Drainage systems.
That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Kluwat.
Yeah, Tommy, and you guys, thank you very much for coming. Just back at the beginning of your presentation, I know, Tom, every time we sit down every year, we talked about the recommendations, okay? We had some things that took us several years to clear up. There were recommendations, audit findings.
Right.
So you feel like we're in good shape now?
I think, some of these are getting addressed pretty quickly. If you look at some of them, like the HUD Section 8 reporting has been one that's sort of lingered on a few years, and that
Yeah, 'cause I remember
is
that.
somewhat
So-
outside of your control because you're having to report through HUD's REACT system, so you're
Yeah.
going through their electronic system, and it takes some time, unfortunately, to move. It seems like it takes a year to get 1 year moved forward, so we're getting caught up. I think 14 is just about to get finished. and then we'll move on to 15, and then 16 and 17
Because,
and get current. So-
You know, you bring that up because I remember that coming several years, but we all know that all the federal funds, it don't matter if it's HUD, if it's the grants, you know, the restrictions on grants and the reporting and how you handle the money with grants, that you just don't have a lot of leeway with it. And I know this staff has got their job cut out for them to try to stay in touch with all that as we're reaching out in 7 directions to try to get monies, you know, sometimes.
Right.
So to manage all that. I do want to talk about the fact that some of the findings on, like, one I did mention, I'm chairman of utilities, so, you know, utilities, as we're getting into the sewer with all our, everything we got going and all, well, we gotta be in tune with it. And we gotta do what we say, and we gotta be right on time with what we're doing. So we appreciate any input on that.
Right.
And,
And the staff seemed to jump on it pretty quick.
Yeah.
Once we sat down and went through it,
Yeah.
they seemed to start initiating kind of a.
we've had some issues that we've had to correct within the last 6, 7 months that worked on issues that have been lingering around for a couple of years. And
Right.
hell, when I leave, then somebody's gonna work on the issues that I left behind, you know, and things like that. I wanna go to page 7, the cash and investments, primary government. And just, the growth of the discretionary fund, you know? So that's one of the things that in transparent government that the public generally questions, you know. Well, we know you can't fool with the fire tax because that's for the fire department. You know, you can't fool with mental health, you know, you can't fool with this and that, but discretionary. Within our budget, we pay some stuff out of discretionary funds, okay, so I'm just looking at the growth of the discretionary fund from 2013 as we look at that 2017. So, you know, and that,
Yeah, and a lot of that's on the strength of how well, you know, how sales taxes,
right?
sort of, come to be over the last
Yeah.
5 years. So that's where the growth has been,
And I just want to make it clear that that's nothing that anybody's moving around.
Right,
If-
right,
If your
right.
portion is
Right.
there and then your taxes go up, well, your portion gets bigger. Just like,
Right,
you know,
that's
everybody
exactly
gets a
right.
bigger portion.
And what I would say that you've done a good job with is, it's easy for a lot of governments to get in trouble with, you know, sales tax can be a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Some years it's high, some years it's low, and spending operationally up to the high points can be very problematic. And you've not done that over the course of time, that you sort of kept your operations as even as you can. And so in these high sales tax years, when you have something major on the river that's occurring,
Right.
and they're generating a lot of sales tax, you've been able to sort of bank that. And so it's either falling into that particular fund for your sales tax number 1 district, or it's been, in a lot of cases, moved over into a number of capital projects. So, you know, drainage tax, a lot of that goes into that drainage capital project, so that's how money's been accumulated.
Right.
And a lot of your road money, you don't really have a dedicated road tax. So a lot of this excess sales tax, that 1 cent sales tax, you've been able to accumulate money into that road program. That's, I mean, the thing you've done is sort of keep your operational spending somewhat flat, and then you have these big peaks of sales tax, you're able to dedicate them and push them into funds that you can make a conscious decision to spend them on.
Yeah.
Whether that's roads or drainage or whatever sort of major endeavor you want to take on.
And I just want to summarize by hitting on what both Councilman Lamberts, Dempsey, and Todd had spoke on drainage, that we've got our drainage tax renewal coming up. And the best way that we can, you know, that we stay on top of what we're doing, and the people have faith that we're trying to do something to improve the drainage in East Ascension, and that their taxes are going to good use. We've got major projects that we put together, and we've been pushing a program for a little bit better than 8 years now, actually getting projects off the ground. And we've got a major project that's at the threshold, the Lawyers Levy extension, and we're going to continue on. We're going to continue moving on and looking at regional participation in regional. We've always been open-minded to participation in regional projects. The Comite diversion, we have a certain member, part of Ascension Parish that pays into that tax base, and you know, the Amite River Delta folks, and we're just going to keep pushing on, and we need that. Our budget is based on that income, and I would appreciate it, anybody that could support it. Thank you.
Mr. Lawler?
Thank you all for being here. I just want to kind of jump onto the bandwagon about how much money we actually have and what these numbers actually say. Transportation is, of course, my passion. It says 53 million, but I think about 36 million of that is encumbered, so we don't have money sitting there. In your opinion, is it proper to keep a 10 to 13 million dollar in the bank for emergencies, or are we keeping too much in there for emergencies or too little?
Well, part of the reason you've got some discretionary dollars sitting behind is for emergencies. So that's part of the design of keeping some dollars at your discretion to, when we had the flood in 2016, you had to front load in all those costs that FEMA later reimbursed you for. That's partly from an emergency point of view. I think having those dollars up in the general and sales tax makes a lot of sense. Certainly, I think capital outlay dollars, part of it, you have accumulated a lot. Certainly, you're going to be spending a lot. To sort of set a minimum would sort of be dependent upon, I don't know, I'd probably kind of look at it more from a project spending standpoint. Maybe you don't permanently hold anything. I would almost have to look at all that together.
Okay.
The capital outlay part with that 33 million of it, the discretionary, just to see how that fits. It's kind of a hard question to say that a minimum should be, generally, at least with roads, you can kind of plan those out in good advance. But
I think part of what I was getting at is that we should keep some fund balance in there. If we spend that down to zero, and there a bridge collapse, there is another storm that causes a problem, we have to borrow that money, which is going to cost us more in the long run.
Right. And it takes time to issue bonds and things of that nature, so you can't, if you had some sort of major, let's say, bridge collapse, it would be a good idea to keep some dollars in there. But if you were to try to go out and bond it to take care of that, that's going to take you 3 to 4 months on a fast pace to get to some dollars. And then you're in the process of trying to set up contracts and actually get the work done. So that's obviously too long to wait on. So, it probably makes some sense. And some of it would be based on, I think the dollar amount would be based on how do you see the age of your system. And taking the bridge example is having an idea of how old are our bridges and what are the foreseeable needs. And if you've got a host of bridges that are maybe suspect, then maybe that dollar amount's larger. But if you've got maybe a newer system that you don't expect to give you major problems, maybe the dollar, you hedge the dollars and use them at a little faster pace, and you don't quite hold back as much. I'd probably personally be somewhat strategic about how much I think I need based on what's the state of the system.
Well, unfortunately, right now, we don't have nearly enough revenue to fix all of our road problems. We get, I think it's 2/3 of a 1 cent sales tax, about $8 million a year,
Right.
which doesn't really go anywhere.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
That's the unfortunate part. It's just-
Unfortunately, in that world, in the road world, it's just it's not inexpensive.
No,
to address needs.
we don't get enough, simple as that.
Yeah.
Not enough money there. The other thing I just thought was interesting was our unemployment rate in the parish is at 3.3%, which seems to be pretty phenomenal. It's on page 223 of the big book. That's pretty phenomenal. Just 2017, we've had an increase in per capita personal income. The personal income has overall gone up, and with this low unemployment rate, it seems like we're heading in the right direction as far as
Economically.
Economically, we're doing the right thing. That low unemployment is
Yeah, very
phenomenal.
low compared to the national averages.
Okay.
So that's obviously strong. We get this from the Census Bureau, so we're not making those numbers up.
Well, I didn't think you're making any of these numbers up.
Well,
That's where I'd be worried.
Like I said, we're not labor statisticians or experts with that, so we grab this data directly from there, which is based on what gets reported upstream to the feds.
I think that's great for Ascension Parish.
Yeah,
Thank y'all.
Absolutely.
I have
Mr.
no
Johnson.
questions.
Just one brief comment. It's kind of reiterate what other folks have said already, I guess just in a different way. So basically, the increase in revenue we have on hand from last year, or from 2016 to 2017, is bonds that we sold, correct? And so those bonds were sold in an idea of doing some projects that have to be planned out and designed and all those other things. So I know we first took office, we had, I think it was $40 million that was sold by the Drainage Board. And while they had concepts of different plans, it took us, we're still, one of the Laurel Ridge Levee is one of the projects that was part of that plan for that
Yeah.
bond that was sold. And we're still working to get that project completed. So, as Councilman Lambert and Councilman Kluwat alluded to, there's a lot of things that we do. We have these monies that's there, and it is a lot of money, and it's on the books. Like, we have a bunch of surplus there, but it's basically tagged for a project, specific projects, that when it comes time to actually getting those things accomplished, that money's going to be gone. So it's not money that we actually have available to us to spend or anything else at this point in time. So I just want to make sure you reiterate that.
You have plans.
Yeah.
Certainly. Thank you. I don't, my fellow members of the Finance Committee have certainly asked all the questions, and you have answered them that I have. Mr. Lambert, we're going back around. Mr. Todd Lambert.
Yeah, I'm looking at finance agenda tonight, looking at this year's budget, and the revenues coming in, and we're seeing a decrease. We still look stable enough, in first 3 months, first quarter of this month, it's been down pretty good, so we're a little concerned there, but y'all still feel strong, we still strong enough to handle a pretty good reduction in revenue coming in?
Yeah, I think that you can kind of see the growth in the numbers.
Yeah.
That one of the things you haven't done is spent up to some of these high points from an operational standpoint. So, the consumption of all those excess dollars is, to me, it has been conscious for projects, which are one-time in nature. So, which is, to me, is a really good way to use surplus dollars. And so you haven't grown your day-to-day kind of obligations up to a high level that a decrease like that's going to be detrimental to the finances of the parish. So I don't see that.
You
I
don't
think
see
there's
that
a big
happening.
enough spread that it could come down, and it certainly won't affect day-to-day operations. It may affect how much you can accumulate for capital projects.
Right.
But you've sort of done it in a really good, in terms of how you utilize sales tax. You've got some portion of it that covers day-to-day operations, but you've got a pretty large portion that's covering just set-asides for capital projects. I think it's been a good way to go. And so, it really protects you in down times.
Appreciate it, Tom.
Thank you,
Councilman, let me thing, and several of y'all have brought it up. If we do not renew that drainage tax, we will be laying off people in the maintenance of drainage. I promise you that. Because that tax is for the maintenance of the drainage system.
Correct.
So without it, we will cut into the manpower for drainage for sure.
Very important.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. Do you gentlemen have anything further?
No, thank you for the dialogue.
It's our pleasure. Thank you for
Yeah,
the
just,
meetings previous.
If I know a lot of this is fresh, if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We can come meet individually, return to full council, whatever you guys please. Just please get in contact with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I do want to say I find you all very responsive. Anytime any of us have reached out, we are always, we always have very quick contact, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure.
Right. Number 9, the ERP Implementation Progress Report. Brandon O'Day. Good evening, Brandon. Thank you for being here.
Good evening, Chairwoman Casso, Finance Committee. I'm just here this evening to give you guys an update on the progress that we've made on the Phase 1 of the ERP project. I got a couple slides here to kind of help us visualize the progress up to this point, and then I'll follow it up with the next item on the agenda, which is to extend our contract with Baker Tilly, who's been helping us out. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So these are the different modules and the different groups within the parish that are affected by Phase 1. The majority of them are in the finance department, and then we also have requisitions, POs, and vendors that are handled by our purchasing department. And then we have contracts and grants, which is our legal and our grants department. We've got workflow and approvals, which kind of affect the entire parish, especially when it comes to requisitions and purchase orders. And then, well, I already mentioned that vendors is part of purchasing. So this is our timeline. From beginning to end, we started in November 2017 with fundamental reviews. This was basically the Tyler Group introducing us to the software, showing us some of the different modules with sample data in them. Then we moved in January, beginning of this year, with current and future state analysis. That is whenever the implementation consultants from Tyler asked us a million questions. They went through and documented how we currently do business, and then the future state is how do you want to do business in the future, and how is that future business going to work with the new software. March of this year, we began configuration of system settings. Some of that we're kind of still going through today as we find out how things work. We're kind of going back and changing some of that. Also, that same month, we began doing data conversions and data imports. That's taking the data from our legacy systems, getting it formatted correctly, and getting it imported into the new system, or into our test environment to begin testing it. April, we began process training, part one of it, and then we followed it up and began doing process training and review this month. And for the rest of the year, we're going to be doing end-user training, additional testing and training, and then we are looking at a go-live right now in October. And then, of course, we'll have support from our Tyler Group on site after the go-live to make sure that everything's running as expected. This is kind of hard to see, but this is just an example of some of the settings that have to be configured for the requisition and purchase order modules. Every module that I mentioned before has a group of settings like this, and if they're not set up properly, the system's not going to work. And we've been, like I mentioned, we've been kind of going through, and as we begin testing things, we're finding out, okay, well, they asked this question, but we didn't really understand what they were asking, and we didn't give them the right answer. We got to go back and do it again. This is an example of what the requisition module looks like. This is what all of our departments will be seeing whenever they go to enter their requisitions. This is what our purchase order central module is going to look like. This is the module that Ms. Joan and her group are going to be working a lot in. You can see here we had a test purchase order that went through the system. Looks like it was for $1. And then you have up there all the information that goes along with it. I want to mention too, at the very top in the middle, if you can see it, it says attach. Along with these modules that I listed, we're also, as part of this system, we're going to have a document management system. So whenever the actual PO that gets issued and that gets sent to the vendor, it's tied to all these modules. So whenever you click the attach button, this is what our new purchase orders are going to look like. And you can see within this system, we have all the metadata, which is on the side, all the information about that PO that we capture so that we can easily search for it in the future. And obviously, that's going to help a great deal when it comes to reporting. Here we have what's called Expenditures Central. So this is what the accounts payable people are going to be seeing. We've got, again, a lot of test data in the system. You can ignore some of those. Some of them we were kind of having fun with. I think we've got lots of presents for Ashley. Poor Ashley sitting here. But anyway, this was just sample data that we were working with, trying to figure out how it's going to work in the system.
Yeah. Let's please don't let anybody think that we are actually buying lots of presents for Ashley.
Correct. This is definitely the
party supplies.
This is the test environment. Absolutely.
So it's not a party. Great.
So this is what the Account Central module is going to look like. This is what all of your department heads are going to be able to access to see what their current balances are in each of their different accounts. And this is kind of a blown up version of it. But this is something that was heavily demanded by our department heads whenever we were initially looking for a new system, is for them to have the ability to see in real time what their balances are in each of their accounts. Of course, we didn't have a budget in at the time, so everything shows $0. But And this was just a picture that was taken during some of our power user training. That's the majority of your finance department right there. And I can't tell what module that was they were learning, but the ladies spend 3 days a week for the entire day of those 3 days doing this training. So they've obviously are being stretched to the limit as far as also being able to get their daily jobs done, having to put in the overtime and do all the homework that's required to make this successful. And this is the first time that we printed checks in the new system. Again, it was just sample data, so they weren't real checks, but it was a big accomplishment because we had a number of issues up to that point to get there. And here we have the remaining schedule for Phase 1. This is kind of a detailed, in-the-weeds look at the remaining items on our calendar. It's 2 pages. I couldn't fit it all on 1 page, but we're in the process right now of adding additional training time, because that's kind of one thing that we're finding out along the way is the initial amount of training that we thought we needed is not sufficient enough. So we're going through, we have additional training hours in the project that are not going to cost us any additional money because we converted some of the conversion and import time over to training time. So I'm definitely happy about that because that's something that we've been struggling with. And then this is the remaining parts and pieces here up through the middle of October. And that's everything I have as far as the update. If you guys have any questions about the progress that we've made up to this point or anything that you've seen in those slides, I'll be happy to answer them for you.
Gentlemen, does anyone have any questions? I don't know enough to ask a question.
Well, I'm sorry. I do want to also say that the majority of your project leads are here. Actually, I think all of them are here tonight. Sandra, Ms. Martha, and then your finance group here, as well as Ms. Joan from purchasing. Like I mentioned, everybody's having to put in that extra time right now. Not only are they doing their day jobs that they've always done, but they're also having to learn a new system, and they're having to come into these meetings and explain what their processes are and if they want any changes to them and how can we best get that to work inside the new software. And it's been stressful for everybody. And this next item on the agenda will hopefully make it less stress on us. But it's been tough, but they've been battling through.
Well, from my point of view, and I'm certainly I speak for the rest of the members of the council, we appreciate the tremendous effort that the departments are putting forward to bring us to this new level of technology inside the parish. I think it's going to help us in so many ways that we don't even understand yet. So you all do, and we thank you for all the effort that you're putting forward. Brandon, thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions here or any comments from the staff? Mr. Dawson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Finance Committee. I just want to say that, again, there's been a lot of effort to get this done. And I want to commend the efforts. I know the leads, I mean, Ms. Gwen and I have talked about it, Brandon and I have talked about it, that they've done quite a bit to the point that they demand, in a way, that they get the information they need to make this work. And they are pushing the Tyler implementers to make sure that it happens. Sometimes it may not be taken in the right manner, but they are doing what's needed for Ascension Parish to make sure Ascension Parish has what it needs to implement this incredible program that's been tasked by us, by administration, and by this council, to the point that purchasing has to shut down their whole purchasing department for a day just to be able to attend, to make sure everyone gets the training. No one is there taking care of their business while they're gone, so they have to double up to get it done. So I just want to make sure that I commend Brandon and Gwen and Celeste and Joan and all the others that put the time out and handle that job. I've been getting a little more involved with it, with Brandon, been talking to President Matassa about it, and he said, you know, put the time in it to help, and it's overwhelming. But you have a committed group of people that's going to make sure that it happens. So thank you for the support, and Brandon, thanks. Good job.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none, then we'll move on to item number 10, the renewal of the contract with Baker Tilly. Have a motion by Councilman Todd Lambert, a second by Councilman Benny Johnson. Any questions? Any objections? Hearing none, that motion passes.
Thank you all.
Number 11, the monthly contract reports. Ms. Sandra.
Good evening. You have before you a list of all the contracts that we entered into in the month of May. Do you have any questions?
Does anyone have any questions about Ms. Sandra's report, monthly contracts?
So move.
Have a
They accept it.
Second.
motion and a second to approve your report. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. I'm sure there were no objections to that, since there were no questions.
Thank you.
Number 12, the APG title labor grade recommendations. Talita?
Madam Chair, I make a motion, we move this to the Personnel Committee.
Is there any objection to that? Or is there a time constraint around getting this done this evening?
There's not.
I'll
Okay.
second that.
All right, then we have a motion and a second to move this report to the Personnel Committee. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr.
I just want, just make note that we wanted to get Personnel Committee more involved in this process, so that's why we're moving that back there. And it's not the issue of that, but we just need personnel to be more involved with these administrative issues.
We're at a point with this stuff to where in the history, we've had Personnel Committee making these decisions or working with staff on these type of moves and then bringing those to the full council, and that's what we're trying to do now, is get that back to where we were before.
Absolutely. So we have a motion and a second. Any questions? Any further comments? Any objections? Hearing none, that motion passes. And we'll get with Mr. Johnson, as we talked about earlier, about in scheduling that Personnel Committee meeting.
I appreciate the attention.
Thank you. All right. Now, item number 13, Ms. Gwynn.
Good evening. You have your regular sales and use tax report. This is collections for the month of April based on March sales. You can see our 3 sales tax districts, mostly the same story. The figures are really depict the flood of 2016 and the completion of a major chemical plant. The month-to-month comparisons are all positive, but that's due to a $1 million audit that was settled in April. And otherwise, they would probably just be flat from 16 from 17. Or 17 from 16, rather. So, but you can easily see the year-to-date figures are still down a little bit. We're okay so far with our budget comparisons. And the charts that follow, you can see where what I just said was true. The chemical plants are down, business to business is down, motor vehicles are down, and consumer retail is actually up compared to year-to-date. And then the pie chart, you can see those comparisons too. And then the last page represents all 3 of our sales tax districts, and it's compared to from 2010 to 2018. Yellow is year-to-date on all the years, and the red is the balance of the years that were completed. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Are there any questions, gentlemen? I don't hear any, Ms. Gwynn, so we'll move along
Okay, thank you.
to item number 14, the Revenue and Expenditure Report.
Good evening. Before you are the monthly reports for the month of April 2018. Revenues are at 26.48%, and expenditures are at 32.54% at 33% of the year. Page 3 are charts that compare year-to-date revenue and expenditure for both operating and capital to the budget. Page 4 and 5 gives an explanation of the funds that are highlighted on page 1 and 2 that are under the budget for revenues or over the budget for expenditures by 5% or more. And the last page reflects all checks issued in April over 100,000. The total, the checks were $1,942,326.71. Want to review the report? If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Does anyone have any questions? I don't see any. So thank you very much. We appreciate that report, Ms. Amanda. Item number 15, bid items. To accept the lowest responsive bids as follows. Ms. Jones.
On May 29, 2018, the Purchasing Department received 3 bids for self-contained breathing air bottles. After review, Ascension Parish Fire District Number 1 recommends accepting the lowest responsive bid submitted by Casco Industries and to authorize the parish president to enter into any applicable agreement or contract for this commodity.
Motion.
Second.
A motion by Councilman Benny Johnson, a second by Councilman Todd Lambert. Any questions? Any objections? Hearing none, that motion passes.
On May 30th, 2018, the Purchasing Department received 5 quotes for the Oak Line drainage improvement. The budget on this project was $110,000. After review, the Purchasing Department and East Ascension Drainage recommend accepting the lowest responsive quote submitted by Expert Maintenance and to authorize the parish president to enter into any applicable agreement or contract for this project.
Have a motion by Councilman Dempsey Lambert, a second by Councilman Todd Lambert. Any questions? Any objections? Hearing none, that motion passes.
Before I read this one, I'd like to provide a short explanation.
Please.
The budget for this project is $150,000. In 2018, the public bid threshold is $154,450. The department wanted to move the project along pretty quickly, so we agreed to send it out to quote. We sent the quote package out, and excuse me for flipping, to 9 companies and requested them to participate in the quote process. We also set up a mandatory inspection of the site so we could kind of determine if we could get some companies interested in the project, and which we did. At the mandatory site inspection, which we held for a week. I think we held it, let's see if I have it, from May 25th, maybe. Flip, Joan. We held it from May 25th, 2018 through June 5th, 2018. The companies could come at their discretion. We had 7 companies who attended the mandatory, so that made us feel pretty confident that we were going to get multiple quotes. And if you look at my front page, you'll see that I only got 1 quote. So I have discussed it with O'Neill, and O'Neill can speak for himself. We talked about, did we do enough due diligence to move forward? And second, can we initiate a contract that allows the vendor not to be able to submit any change orders?
I spoke with our project manager, Dean, and pretty much told him, tell the contract, if you can bid on this, and you, at this price, there's no room for change orders, because then it would be an act of public works, and they submitted the quote.
Right.
So it's gonna be, they're gonna know up front. Don't come asking for a change order. Very little room for change orders in here.
Well,
Clue on.
well, Chairman Dempsey Lambert of Drainage can chime in, but, you know, we got to get the work done. And I feel like Joan, I'd be the first one to holler 1 bid. You know that.
Yes.
But,
And your
you know,
friend over here.
yeah. And, well, is that a colleague or a friend? I don't know who you're talking about. I don't know who you're pointing at. Anyway, I'm just joking. But seriously, we want to move forward. We know we only have so much budget. So, within the project management, like I said, these folks know that this is a hard money bid. This is what you're going to do it for. You had a good walkthrough. You had ample time for people to question or dispute the scope of work. And the devil's in the details of the scope of work that we initiated. So, right now, if it's legal, I don't have a problem with it.
It's legal, and I told Dean to let him know there's no room, there's very, very little room for any change. You can't say no changeover, but it's gonna be very, very limited if there's gonna be any changeover, because it can't exceed $154,000.
And ethically, we can't hand it out a nickel at a time to work around the law.
Right.
So I want everybody to understand that. Thank you.
Motion.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Todd Lambert, a second by Mr. Aaron Lawler. Any questions?
Not tonight.
I was checking. Any objections? Hearing none, that motion passes. Item number 16. A motion to adjourn by many people and many seconds. Pick one.
I'm gonna give you a call. I gotta go pick up the boys.
I'll talk to you.